Hey guys, what's going on? It's Ben here, and today I want to address the Kawhi Leonard saga, just all in all. Specifically trade rumors or ideas more so that I came up with for him. I came up with 5 Kawhi Leonard trade ideas, and I think it'd be fun to go through them and explain how they would work and how the starting lineups and rotations would be affected on each of the teams that I propose this with both the Spurs and the team that is involved with the trade with them. So just a little bit of background about the Kawhi Leonard saga. He had a leg injury that flared up towards the beginning of the season. He's barely played this year. And basically 2 months ago, the doctors on the Spurs team cleared him, but he and his doctors said that he wasn't clear to play. And so it's just been a big conflict between him and the Spurs organization as to whether he should play or not. Ultimately, it's up to him, and he's been sitting out. But both Popovich and some of the other Spurs players have become really upset with Kawhi and have been taking shots at him in the media. And, at the end of the day, this might end up forcing a trade. Much like the Paul George situation, where he said he didn't want to be in Indiana, and they ended up having to trade him a year before his contract was up. A year from now is when Kawhi's contract is up, so it could become a very similar situation. And so let's kick it off and let's go through some of the potential trades that could happen with Kawhi and some other teams. So I came up with all these trades on the ESPN trade machine. It can be really fun to just mess around on there and look at potential trades and see what you can come up with. And so here are a few that I came up with. I obviously included draft picks as well to make stuff work. So here we go. The first trade I have is with the Cavaliers to get LeBron some backup to hopefully entice him to stay in the offseason. And so for this trade, I have Kawhi going to the Spurs and Kevin Love and the Brooklyn draft pick Kawhi Leonard going to the Cavs and Kevin Love and the Brooklyn pick going to the Spurs. And so the way this trade shakes out is that the starting lineup for the Cavs would end up being George Hill, Rodney Hood, Kawhi Leonard, LeBron James, Tristan Thompson, with Clarkson as a 6-man. And for the Spurs, it would be Murray, Mills, Danny Green, Kevin Love at the 4 and Aldridge at the 5, or Love at the 5 and Aldridge at the 4. That could work either way. I think that this is a trade that would work well for both teams. The Spurs would get that draft pick, which would hopefully be in the top 6 or 7, and they could get a very good rotation player out of that. And the Cavs will get Kawhi, which would obviously be a great addition. He'd really help their defense, which was ranked 29th in the league this year. And he's a good offensive output too. He would work in the space and pace game that the Cavs like to play. He's a good 3-point shooter, not a great 3-point shooter, but I think he would do fine as a second option to LeBron. Most people don't really realize it, but in 2016, when they won 67 games, Aldridge was really the first option, and Kawhi was the second option. But then in 2017, last year, they switched that, and Kawhi became the first option, so he did a lot better. So I think he would be fine as the second option to LeBron. I think that they honestly wouldn't do that much better. They'd probably win 55 games instead of 50 like they did this year. Because really, besides Kawhi and LeBron, you wouldn't have anybody. The supporting cast would still be a lot weaker than it has been in the past for the Cavaliers. And for the Spurs, they'd be better than they were this year without Kawhi, but they would not be a threat in the West to like the Warriors and Rockets are right now. I think that they'd win, around 57 games, but that's not good enough these days in the Western Conference, really, unless you want to be a second-round team. All right, moving on, we have a Lakers trade with the Spurs. There's been a lot of rumors that Kawhi would go to the Lakers in free agency if he played out his contract and possibly team up with LeBron or Paul George, which could happen and would be a very fearsome combination. I'm going to act in this situation as if those free agents don't come. So when I do the lineup projections, I'm not going to say Kawhi and Paul George or Kawhi and LeBron. I'm just going to act with the people that they have now, even though that might change in a few months. Okay, so the trade I have set up is Kawhi goes to the Lakers, and the Spurs get back Kyle Kuzma, Josh Hart, and Luol Deng. Now, don't go crazy on me. Luol Deng is only in there to make the salaries work because Josh Hart and Kyle Kuzma combined only make $3 million, and right now Kawhi makes 18 and is, after his contract expires, going to want to make 35 to 40. So that just has to happen to balance out the trade. Luol Deng has to be in there. He'd basically just be a salary dump for the Lakers, and the Spurs would just have to accept that. But they would get two players who are each about 21 years old, very promising. You know, Popovich has done great with players like DeJounte Murray and Patty Mills, who are relative unknowns, but he's transformed them into very reliable, good rotation players. I feel like Josh Hart really fits that bill well, and that he could even start for the Spurs, and that could be a good fit for them. They don't really have a solid shooting guard. Danny Green is decent, but they could slide him to the 3 and play Josh Hart at the 2, and Manu's too old to be an actual option, so I like the Josh Hart addition. Kyle Kuzma, very good, averaged about 15 points a game this year. Could play the 4 or the 3, good at scoring. You know, he would do well under Popovich. He's only going to grow and become a better player, I think. So the Spurs would be hitting more of a rebuild if they chose this option, but still having Kuzma and Hart would be better than having nothing like they had this year when Kawhi sat out the whole time. And so the starting lineups for each team, as far as the Lakers, they would be running Lonzo, Kawhi, and Ingram at the 2 and the 3. That'd be a bit of a tight squeeze, but I think Ingram would actually play more of the 2 and Kawhi more of the 3, because I feel like Ingram has more of a shooting guard style than Kawhi does. He's more of a shooter. He's just taller would be the only thing, but that would only help him in that situation. So you'd have those 2 at the 2 and the 3, and then I'm just in this situation going to assume that Randall and Lopez are still on the team just for simplicity's sake, because we can't really predict who the Lakers are going to sign to play those positions in the offseason. But if you look at that 5, that's a pretty solid 5. And on the other side of that, if we look at the Spurs, they'd have Murray in at the point. I have down here Green at shooting guard, Kuzma at small forward, Aldridge and Gasol rounding it out with Patty Mills coming off the bench. I think that you could also slide Patty Mills into the starting lineup and take out Green or Kuzma, depending on if you want one of them to roll with the second unit. Kuzma could more direct the second unit and be the alpha, whereas in the starting lineup he would be the second option to Aldridge, but either way it would work fine. And so that's the wrap-up of that trade, and now we're going to go on to the next team that I have down, which is the 76ers. Again, there's lots of rumors that they might get LeBron in the offseason, but I'm just going to not include that when I do lineup predictions because I feel like that's too unreliable, and you can't really you just can't count on that happening, so it's going to mess up all this if we include potential things. So for this trade, I have the 76ers getting Kawhi and the Spurs getting Robert Covington and Dario Saric. I like this trade a lot. It feels very realistic to me. Both Saric and Covington are very solid NBA players that, you know, in the right situation could each give you 16 points a night. Covington gives you very good defense. Pretty much a 3-and-D player, exactly what is necessary in this league these days. And Saric is a stretch 4 who can rebound well too. And so I think that they'd be getting a pretty good return for Kawhi. They wouldn't have that star punch in return, but it would still be a pretty good haul. Looking at starting lineups for the 76ers, I'm going to assume that Fultz develops enough that he can start next year. So I have him in at point, assuming that they re-sign Redick, which they may not, but just going to assume. So he's in at shooting guard, Kawhi at small forward, Simmons at power forward, and Embiid in at center. Now, if you take that lineup and you assume that Kawhi is healthy and has recovered from the injury fine, and assuming that Embiid doesn't miss a great deal of time, that could be the best team in the East and might be the best team in the East. because you just look at them, they would be quite a reckoning to have to deal with. They would have good defense, they'd have good shooting in Redick, and Embiid's range is underrated. He is actually a stretch five. He's big and he rebounds and he blocks a lot, but he has a good three-point ball, so he would help offset Ben Simmons' lack of a jump shot, so that can't be forgotten. Fultz's jump shot would be a really big factor in this lineup because, Simmons can't shoot it. Kawhi can, but that's not his hallmark. As we know, Redick, that's all he does. He's a spot-up shooter, really good at it. Averaged about 18 points a game this year. And Embiid can shoot it, but doesn't shoot a ton of games. So they'd really need Fultz to develop a jump shot to help spread the floor, or else they'd just be way too crowded down in the paint. And so looking at the Spurs lineup, we would have Murray in at point guard, Green at shooting guard, Covington and Saric at the 3 and the 4, and Aldridge at the 5. I just assume that they'd want that lineup. They could also do something where they put Gasol and Aldridge at the 3 and the 4, or at the 4 and the 5, and they have Saric coming off the bench. Gasol is getting really old, though, if you look at him and you just watch him play. So maybe he should start coming off the bench. And they'd be a little undersized, but I think that they'd be fine. They'd have a really nice spread out court. Every one of those players can hit a 3. Aldridge is a great stretch 5 if you want to put him there. They wouldn't have much rebounding. Saric does okay on the boards, but he's not a banger by any means. He could maybe get 8 a game if he had starters minutes. He's getting around that now, like 7, I think. Covington is long, so that could help rebounding. But as I say, if Gasol is their 6th man, they'd still do all right in that they could bring him in whenever they need to get big. All right, moving on to the next one. This one is probably the least likely to happen, but I included it just for fun. So in this trade, Kawhi goes to the Timberwolves, and the Spurs get back Andrew Wiggins. This would have to be on the contingency that Kawhi signs an extension for the Supermax, like Wiggins just got his deal for the max from the Wolves. This way the salaries would match up, and then it wouldn't be a discrepancy because this particular year Wiggins is making $7 million and Kawhi is making 18. But next year Wiggins will be making around 35 and Kawhi will only be making 18 still. But if Kawhi signs the extension, then he'll be making around that, maybe 40, but the salaries would match up and they'd be able to be traded. And I like this trade as a Wolves fan, obviously, because we get Kawhi Leonard. But I don't think it's terrible for the Spurs at all. I think that they get a guy who last year, as a second option on a team, scored 23 a game. And he's only 22 years old. A lot of people are saying that Andrew Wiggins is a huge disappointment in his NBA career, but he is 22. And I know a lot of players who have come out of their shell late in their careers. Look at Kyle Lowry. Kyle Lowry was getting to his first All-Star game when he was 29 years old. So I'm not saying that Andrew Wiggins should aim to get to his first All-Star game at 29, but I'm saying he's got 15 years left of his career, and he's got plenty of time to grow. And who knows, under Popovich, who is a wizard when it comes to coaching, at age 24, he could be a defensive stopper, which he definitely is not now. But Popovich is a good player developer. Just look at some of these guys who should be in the G League, but are starting on his team and doing well. It's evidence that he can transform a player. And I think on the Spurs, Wiggins would be getting about 25 a game. He'd have more of a scoring load. And I think he wants that because he is really a pure scorer. It's what he does best in this league. He's a very poor man's Tracy McGrady. He's got the height and everything. He just doesn't have the shooting range. That's the only thing holding him back. If you could develop a three-point shot and rebounding and assisting and defense, then he'd be the whole package, obviously. But maybe we'll just settle for 2 of those, and that'll be good enough. But I think that Popovich could do well with him. And the T-Wolves would do great with Kawhi. He would really help their defense. He'd be a great defensive improvement currently over Wiggins. They'd be giving up a lot of youth for, Kawhi's about 26, so he'd be he might be about 27 actually. But either way, they'd be giving up about 5 years of youth, but I think it'd be worth it. So look at each of the starting lineups. The Wolves would be Teague, Butler, Kawhi, Gibson, and Towns. You know, if everyone could stay healthy, I think that would be a pretty potent lineup. And then transitioning over to the Spurs, you'd have Murray, Green, Wiggins, Aldridge, and Gasol. You know, decent spacing. Aldridge, Gasol, Green, all can hit threes well for their relative positions. Wiggins, not that good. Murray, okay. Not really his best shot, but he can do it. He can do it about as well as Wiggins in the low 30s. So they wouldn't be better, but if you add Wiggins to this current team, they're a better team, you know? That's a weird way to look at it, but since Kawhi's been out this entire year, adding a player of Wiggins' value to nothing, they'd essentially be trading Wiggins for nothing if Kawhi's just going to sit out the rest of the time. So that would be an improvement. All right, moving on to the final trade I have here. I think this is the most intriguing and possibly the most beneficial for both teams. So this Boston Celtics. The Celtics get Kawhi Leonard, and the Spurs get Gordon Hayward, Marcus Smart, and if that's not enough for them, the Kings' first round pick next year, which should probably be in the top 5 if it's the Kings. All right, so I know that Hayward is coming off this huge injury, but Kawhi is too, so there's risks on both sides. Kawhi's is less severe, but I still think that Hayward will be good. You know, he was a fringe all-star before. I think that he'll be still at that fringe all-star type of level, give you about 20 points a game. You know, 25 and 5 would be about as good as Aldridge. You know, that's good for really not having Kawhi there this year. They'd be improving, getting an all-star caliber player. Marcus Smart, a great defender, gives it his all on the court every night. If they started him, he could probably get about 12 points a game, 6 assists, something like that. But they'd really mostly want him for his defensive stopping abilities. He could platoon with Patty Mills and Green and Murray. It'd be a good fit. Let's look at the projected starting lineups for each team with this trade. So for the Celtics, I have Irving, Brown, Kawhi, Tatum, and Horford. This could be switched around, and they could put one of those guys like Tatum on the bench and start Aaron Baines if they want to go big, or they could just bring Aaron Baines in if they want to go big at some point during the game. Or if they keep Greg Monroe, that could be an option too, to have him in there. I just think that this is the most talented 5, and they fit positionally, so that's why I put them out as the starting lineup. But if they want to stagger their playmakers, they would probably put Tatum on the bench and start Baines instead, but that's the lineup I have. Or put Brown on the bench too, they could do that. But then that would force Tatum to play the 2, which would be somewhat out of position for him. He's a really hard guy to put into a position because he has played shooting guard for the Celtics this year, but he came into the league as power forward. And he's played mostly small forward this year because they've been going with that big Aaron Baines, Horford, and Tatum lineup, so he's been forced to the 3. But I think that he is really a positionless guy, and he's got height. He's about 6'8", 6'9", so he's not too big to be a shooting guard. He'd have a distinct advantage being taller than most of them, so it could work if they want to bring Brown off the bench and put Tatum at the 2, but I don't feel like they could do that for too long of a stretch in a game. Maybe about 10 minutes, but no longer than that, because I don't know if he's fast enough to guard all the 2 guards. Okay, and for the Spurs, as a starting lineup, I have Murray, Green, Hayward at the 3, Aldridge and Gasol, with Patty Mills coming off the bench and Marcus Smart coming off the bench. You know, you could, if you want to sub in those 2 for either Murray or Green, you could do that. It would really just be up to Popovich, whatever chemistry he wants to work out on the team. Marcus Smart might be a good guy to bring off the bench like he's been doing in Boston because he's a big energy guy and he really could be a good presence coming off the bench and giving a mid-game pop. And, you know, I don't know if he is starter caliber. He hasn't really started that much. He started a bit for the Celtics this year and a bit last year, but he hasn't been a consistent starter. But, maybe it's his time in San Antonio. I feel like this is really the most beneficial trade of all the ones I've gone through. Each team gets good value back, and especially if you throw in that draft pick, the Spurs actually make out really well if Gordon Hayward is healthy. But I'm assuming in this situation that he's healthy and still going to give you around the same numbers, about 20 a game. So that's all I got for today, guys. I hope you liked the video, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.